Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's edition of retfos, where I take old stories I've narrated and update into modern audio standards. This particular story is called The Great Filter, Cheat Code, written by N.P. Marley. Gregory Stain watched as his contact for this project, one Zared Drayton, disembarked from his transport ship onto the orbital platform that he'd been transferred to for the duration of the project. Zared Drayton was a member of the Kawarian, a race known for their fascination with things that had happened in the past, and whose talent for deciphering past events had produced some of the most celebrated historians in the galaxy. Some had described their prowess at piecing together the past to mystical or psychic abilities. But the Kawarian fervently denied this. The Kawarian were a strange, short, and spindly race that rarely topped 4 feet tall, with long dexterous fingers and soft yet bristly greenish-brown fur across their backs and the backs of their limbs. Frankly, Gregory thought they looked like someone had taken some half-shaved Ewoks and stretched them like silly putty. Zared was dressed in traditional and practical Kawarian exploratory garb, almost like he expected to dive straight into an active dig site. As far as Gregory knew, he might. Or maybe he just dressed like this every day. Gregory shook Zared's hand lightly, half fearing that he might break the Kawarian's delicate fingers with too firm a grip, and try to act professionally. "Welcome to Space Station Prometheus. I hope your journey was comfortable." "It was," Zared spoke, and Gregory was mildly surprised that the Kawarian wasn't using a translator. He heard about diplomatic-grade language learning tools that could impact fluency in under a month, but hadn't come across them personally. "I am eager to begin preliminary work immediately in figuring out how your species solved the first of the 3 great filters." Gregory nodded in response and left his mind wander a bit as Zared talked about things he already knew. Humanity had pondered the concept of the Great Filter for a while, starting in the late 20th century, wondering what was behind the screaming absence of intelligent life in the galaxy, and eventually concluding that there had to be something preventing possible intelligent species from communicating with humanity. But what? What had been a reason for the galaxy's seeming silence? As it turned out, the main reason was that humanity hadn't yet figured out how to speak and listen to the rest of the galaxy. Radio waves just didn't cut it for talking to civilizations that cracked faster than light travel and communications. But humanity had been right that there were developmental filters that stymied and hindered sapient species from reaching the stars. What humanity hadn't realized at the time they were pondering this was that they'd already overcome all of them. Faster-than-light travel and/or communications was, surprisingly, not considered one of the 3 great filters. Apparently, less than 1% of all known spacefaring sapiens in the galaxy had reached a point where they could be reasonably judged to be unwilling or incapable of developing such a technology in the future. The 3rd and last great filter, according to the galaxy at large, was actually a species escaping their home planet's gravity well. According to the official galactic records, this problem stumped over 10% of all industrialized sapient species, who never quite solved the problem and gave up on it unless some other species saw fit to uplift or enslave them. As far as the galaxy was concerned, humanity had passed this filter with flying colors back when they landed a man on the moon in the 1960s. Once the gravity well could be cleared with repeated efficiency, it was considered only a matter of time before a sapient race developed either faster-than-light travel or faster-than-light communications. Assuming, of course, that they didn't collapse due to war, natural disaster, etc., of which there were an officially recognized 1% of happening at any given point in a cultural development. Heck, according to the definition the galaxy subscribed to, there were plenty of Earth cultures that had collapsed this way over the centuries. So long as the collapse wasn't global, a species could pick up and move on. The 2nd great filter was considered the Industrial Revolution, where a sapient species learned to automate production. This was considered essential because it freed up large swaths of the species population to menial tasks to engage in more advanced pursuits. It was estimated that a little over 25% of all known civilized sapiens in the galaxy, most older than humanity, had never passed the barrier in development, with many showing no cultural inclination to even try. The 1st great filter, and the one that Zared was here to research but in regards to humanity, was considered agriculture. As far as the rest of the galaxy could tell, the problems with creating a steady self-regulated food supply was so great that roughly 50% of all sapient species were unable to manage it to the point that they could create a stable civilization. There was some extensively researched galactic checklists as to what exactly constituted a stable civilization, but Gregory wasn't well versed in it enough to hold more than a casual conversation. There were some time qualifiers, but most of it revolved around the stability, quality, and dependability of the food supply. Essentially, pretty much every race hoping to make a permanent non-mobile home for itself had to master agriculture at some point, and the exceptions were such bizarre outliers that they only proved the rule all the more. Such as one planet where a particular plant had evolved early on that grew so aggressively that it choked out all other plant life, and all resulting animal life evolved to feed on it, including the local sapiens. Some six-limbed blue cow things whose name Gregory couldn't pronounce. It was such a prevalent and plentiful foodstuff that even the diet of local predators constituted mostly of that plant. Its official name by the locals essentially translated to food, and Gregory had seen a time-lapse recording of space stations' greenhouses where some human xenobiologists had planted a sample of the stuff and could sow in the same area, and it was a wild experience watching the two plants try to wrestle each other into submission. It was too bad the blue cows had never progressed their culture beyond the basics of civilization, likely due to there being no pressing need to secure long-term food sources, much less advanced technology. Their culture had been stagnated at this level since before humanity evolved according to galactic records, and showed no signs of progressing. The other big exception was the only known race of sapient lithovols in the galaxy. The name for themselves sounded like the start of a landslide in their own language, who had a reasonably steady food supply so long as they lived near a very active volcano, or partook in high-tech mineral synthesizers. The only reason that they were spacefaring was because some jackward race, whose name Gregory couldn't recall at the moment, decided they'd make good cheap slave labor and kidnapped a whole species from their primitive Stone Age huts. Gregory shook his head from his musings and started listening to Zared again. As you know, nearly all species that master agriculture also master domestication of native beasts, either as a supplementary labor or as a food source, most often both. Gregory nodded along as Zared went into statistics. He knew the numbers. More than 95% of all civilized sapiens had domesticated one or more native animals. Either something like horses as a work animal, and or something like cows, pigs, and or chickens as livestock. He did have some sympathy for the races that evolved from pure carnivores, as domesticating something whose first instinct was to get as far away from you as possible, and whose second instinct was to break whatever was necessary, like your face. To achieve the first had to be a painful proposition. Funnily enough, domesticating animals for companionship was considered rare, at least until industrialization took hold and some domesticated work animals and occasional livestock made the transition as sapient populations started using machines to facilitate agriculture. Only around 15% of the civilized sapiens domesticated a species for companionship, and so far as each and every known original instance happening prior to the practice of agriculture. Dogs had apparently got a little more than a raised eyebrow from the galactic community before they added humans to that particular 15% club. The issues with measuring agriculture are many, the first of which is successfully driving away predators. Yeah, if you kept livestock, you drove away predators so they wouldn't eat the livestock. If you kept work animals, you drove away predators so they wouldn't eat the work animals. If you hadn't evolved as an apex predator yourself, you drove away predators so they wouldn't eat you. No matter the case, early agriculture to local predators was their food source gathering in one spot and not moving, making it easy to find, making convincing said local predators to stay the fuck away priority number one. All of which inevitably leads to the source of the remaining problems, local pests. And that was the catch-22 of agriculture in general. Once you've driven out all the other predators, all the other animals would pick up on the fact that there is a strange predator-free area. Driving away the larger animals wouldn't be much harder to do than driving away predators. But the smaller animals, the ones that were hard to catch, could hide in places a larger sapien couldn't reach, ate ferociously, and bred like crazy when left to their own devices. Those animals were the bane of most any farmer. The rare, mainly carnivorous species who only farmed livestock got a relatively big pass on this problem at the cost of much lower population seeding, due to the fact that keeping a steady supply of meat was much harder than a steady supply of produce of the same volume. But there were again the exceptions that proved the rule. The rule being that pests like rats and rabbits would seek refuge from predators on the farms where food was plentiful and breed out of control, eating the crops like no tomorrow and ruining harvests. Or worse, carrying parasites with debilitating diseases that would infect populations of those farming communities. Try to store food to eat in times where food could be scarce, they'd break in one way or another and either eat it, contaminate it, or both before those that grew the food could use it themselves. Simply driving them away was temporary at best and completely ineffective at worst, as the siren song of a predator-free territory with plentiful food was too strong for such creatures to ignore. The general solutions of the galaxy boiled down to two options. Either develop methods of preventing such pests from reaching the crops, which could take an inordinately long time to pull off reliably, and slowed the development of civilization as a result, or develop an effective extermination methods, which, in addition to being very difficult to apply to creatures that had evolved to be hard to exterminate, also invariably had unexpected long-term detriments to the local biosphere if successful. There was a rare third option in the cases that disease and contamination was the primary obstacle of developing effective treatment for the resulting illnesses, but there was only a serious solution to the pest problem for less than 10% of all known sapiens. Regardless, the fact was that humanity had done none of these things. Properly seeding environments against pests was still something humanity had trouble doing, even with modern technology, and arguably less success with effective extermination procedures, and neither were from lack of trying. As for the disease option, humanity hadn't made significant headway against diseases until well after achieving stable civilizations according to the galactic definition. It had gotten the galactic academic community into quite a stir, wondering just what the hell humanity had done to solve what was considered one of the toughest problems a developing sapient species could face. It was why Gregory had been assigned as Zared's liaison. He was one of the leading anthropological experts on that era of human history and considered the best local expert to help Zared with his own research into the matter. Zared may have been one of the best and brightest of a race of natural historians, but he didn't have a local's perspective, and often that perspective made all the difference. Of course, outside perspectives were also important, as there was very real chance that whatever oddity had given human the edge was something that humanity considered normal, despite being anything but. There were about a dozen other galactic historians, archaeologists, and anthropologists from as many other races that would trickle in anywhere from a week to a month after Zared arrived. But the little Kawarian was apparently so eager to get started that he'd petitioned to arrive earlier than any of his compatriots. So eager, in fact, that he wanted to get started looking over preliminary historical studies before even getting settled in. Gregory had helped him, clarifying unfamiliar terminology and speed learning a language often overlooked. But even working through dinner, they just didn't see fit to stop to do so, hadn't yielded any insight as to what exactly humanity had done to bypass the best problem. As far as Gregory could tell, all research looked over that afternoon and evening had only served to highlight how unusual that whole thing was, and that humanity had progressed from early agriculture to stable civilization much faster than galactic average. Almost unnaturally fast in comparison. In fact, the speed from which humanity started agriculture to when they achieved reliable spaceflight was rapid enough to easily put them in the top 1% of technological advancement as a species, and all of it was attributed to how quickly they mastered agriculture. Humans were officially wrecking the bell curve of the first great filter, and Zared seemed excited enough to pop over the chance to find out how. Gregory just sighed as he entered his quarters and plopped onto his couch, alerting his cat, Socks, to his presence. The demanding calico immediately jumped up and demanded ear screeches, and he obliged her, settling into the comfort of her presence and the sound of her purrs as he distressed from dealing with a hyperactive researcher all evening. Scratching Socks behind the ears reminded him of when he'd done his dissertation on the origins of why cats were considered magical. A large portion of the paper was focused on Black Plague and the fact that those who failed to get sick were often accused of witchcraft. The fact that many of them owned cats got the cats labeled as witches' familiars and branded as beasts of the devil, when in reality, all they did was... Gregory's eyes widened, and Socks meowed in protest against aborted ear scritches. She protested more as he dove for his quarters communicator. Zared blinked awake as his quarters communication device toned, demanding his attention. He dropped off in a haze of eager excitement almost as soon as he'd hit the mattress, and the early awakening was very unexpected. Shaking himself to something resembling coherence, he hit the button to answer the communicator. "Yes, it's Cats!" The voice of the liaison Gregory announced breathlessly, confusing him greatly. "What is Cats? Is this that silent green joke you humans seem fond of?" "No, the answer. It's Cats. The answer. The answer to—" Zared trailed off as his brain finally engaged enough to answer his own question for him. Perhaps. There was definitely one highly likely possibility in any event. Still, he seemed to be missing a great deal of pieces to this particular puzzle to understand why this was the answer. "You mean you humans second pack-bonded domestic companions?" Multiple pack-bonded domestic companion species were unusual, but not unheard of, and Zared didn't think the galactic community had given it too much thought beyond scheduling some standard future study opportunities. "What do they have to do with the first great filter?" "Everything. That's when they were first domesticated, and they're not pack animals." "Not pack animals, but all known companionship domestication bonds are with natural pack or herd animals, and I was under the impression the cats were carnivores by nature." "They are, but they don't hunt in packs. They're naturally solitary." The conundrum of that statement alone had Zared sitting up and alert. Solitary animals were notoriously difficult to domesticate, as they lacked the bonding instincts early sapiens could exploit to make domestication possible. The great filter issue moved to the back of his mind as it latched onto this new conundrum. "Solitary? But then how did you domesticate them?" "We didn't. They domesticated themselves." They? Zared's mind screeched to a halt. There were many studies that indicated that sapient species underwent a form of genetic domestication as their civilization progressed, but a non-sapient species that self-domesticated. The very idea was so outlandish that he found himself giving it serious credence, if only because it had been proposed by a colleague. "How certain are you on this?" 80 to 90%. "We don't exactly have records of how it happened," Gregory stated, and Zared hummed in affirmation. Recorded history that early in a species' development was beyond unusual. But a bunch of other facts line up. For one, the earliest agricultural records of cats and humans living together aren't until after agriculture. "Really?" Zared's interest was officially piqued. Pack-bonding domestic companions had so far always predated agriculture as a form of uncommon social symbiosis against a hostile biosphere. That humans did so after agriculture began, when they already had pack-bonded domestic companions in the form of dogs. Plus, cats are several times more likely to readapt to the wild than any other domestic animal if released. Zared had grabbed a tablet and was furiously writing notes down at this point, and made sure to add this. It was an unfortunate fact of domestic companion animals that not all sapient caretakers were able to care for them properly, and all too many would rather abandon the animal than admit to personal shortcomings. That cats were able to handle this with less issues suggested an incomplete domestication. Was such a thing even possible after so long a time? Or was it a trait of a domestic feline's solitary hunter-based instincts? Now Gregory was rambling about some old plague, and how cats were considered magical because cat owners were exponentially less likely to contract the disease. This required clarification. "Do you honestly expect me to believe that your domestic feline has healing properties?" "No, not at all. The plague was carried by rats." "One of your local pest animals? I fail to see the Cats eat rats." Oh, now the pieces were falling into place. The felines were natural predators of the pest animals. Any human who kept one or more nearby would suffer less pest presence overall. But how did that equate to domestication? What event would have drawn the two species close enough to... Oh. Are you saying that when your local pest animals started infesting your early farmlands, one of their natural predators followed them? Yes. And your ancestors allowed this? Cats weren't a threat to us. Well, not a serious one. It is a predator. It's a small one. Too small to be a real threat to us. Heck, my cat's probably too small to be a serious threat to you. Zared choked, and he wasn't sure from what. Are you saying your domestic beast could not harm me at all? Harm, sure, if she felt threatened. But you wouldn't need anything more than sutures at worst. The likelihood socks could actually inflict serious harm is minuscule. and I doubt she'd be inclined to try. Zared closed his eyes as he pondered the scenario he was being given. A place where larger beasts had been driven out and now grew plentiful plant-based foods, attracting many smaller animals to where they thought predators would not follow and could eat their fill. The smaller predator, seeing this and weighing the potential benefits of following its prey into the territory of a sapient species and its pack-bonded domestic companions, a larger predator no less, in order to hunt to its heart's content, a creature that felt more threatened by the sapiens and their domestic companions than they could ever be threatened by it. Such a creature would have to be extremely adapted to not just hunting its now plentiful prey, but evading larger predators in order to feel confident in braving such a place, or extremely foolhardy. Zared wondered which his cats fell into, but he could see it. Could see the contemplation of an early human farmer's face as he realized this new intruder was killing off pests that ruined his harvests. Could see the farmer training his dog to ignore the presence of the cat unless it tried to pester the livestock. Could see the cat coming to understand just which animals it was permitted to hunt freely in this strange territory, even as the farmer and their neighbors began taking steps to entice more cats to enter their territory. What the pest animals sought, a predator-free sanctuary of boundless food, the cat was freely given, and in doing so, the pest's desired sanctuary vanished. As far as the first great filter went, it was a solution so unorthodox that it was elegant. "This is a fine theory, of course, but how confirmed is it?" Zared finally asked. "Unfortunately, educated speculation only. Lots of educated speculation, of course, but galactic standards require more in-depth research," Zared finished. It seemed that humanity was not wholly ignorant of the potential benefits this one domestic bond held, only of the scale. They had seen it as a historical curiosity when it was possibly one of the most tree-shattering discoveries of all time. If this research confirmed what he thought it would, these cats may have shaved centuries, perhaps even millennia off of human cultural and technological development. And if it was true, his name on the research filings would secure him immortality amongst the academic circles. He was so excited, he barely managed to go through the social niceties of ending the conversation before drifting back off to sleep. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.